Welcome to our podcast, Minds Over Media. I'm your host, Kara Hutchinson from the Southwestern Ohio Instructional Technology Association, or SOITA, a service of Public Media Connect. Today, my co-host is Sarah Schroder from the University of Cincinnati, and joining us today is Dr. Paul Mihailidis, Professor of Civic Media and Journalism and Special Advisor to the Provost at Emerson College, as well as Chair and Director of the Salzburg Academy on Media and Global Change. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So I'm curious from you, how do you define media literacy, and then specifically civic media, because I know that's one of your focuses?
I've had the fortune in kind of my career to really look at the way in which media can help empower communities, give voice to people of need, and I think for me, media literacy, absent trying to kind of create a reductionist definition, is about all the ways that we can empower community and individuals to have agency with and through media in their spaces of work, in their spaces of living, in their homes, in their public institutions. And I've constantly been intrigued by that question of how can media help provide a sense of belonging, how it can provoke care, and how it can help people find a sense of place and feel like they are active participants in whatever they choose to pursue. My connection to Civic, so I've done a lot on the civic media front, is because I have over some time of research and practice continually come back to the idea that the space of media literacy, it's a necessarily civic pursuit, meaning that we aren't in the area of just helping people better kind of critique and create media just for the sake of allowing them to better do it. There has to be the so what or the what for. And for me, again and again, I've seen in past research that if we simply teach people to be better critical consumers of media without asking them what for, you could create more skill and media literate people to do a whole bunch of things, right? And those aren't all positive. And so the civic side of this for me is intentional in terms of pursuing stronger, more inclusive and just futures, right? And to me, that's necessarily civic pursuit. So I have been particularly concerned with that area in media literacy.
I'm curious how you define civic.
I think, the civic is really, the way that we look at it is it's anything that moves from the personal to the public space. It's like anything outside of the actor's intimate sphere, right? And so that, like, we did a lot of this work in civic media in defining that. Like, it's the processes, designs, and technology that link our personal space to spaces that are beyond the personal. And that's, and that includes institutions, the spaces, and the environments that we inhabit that are necessarily impacted, not just by our own behaviors, but that necessarily impact others and are impacted by others. And so that's kind of how we think it's kind of a intentionally public disposition, right? So it's like all of those, whether it's a physical space, it's a communal space, whether it's an institution, it's all of those things that encapsulate our lives outside of the very kind of personal pursuits we inhabit.
I love that so much, Paul, because we see so many teachers bringing media into their classrooms and having students create things. But that so what is incredibly critical for
Right.
making it purposeful and intentional, and the focus on community that you gave it as well, the role that media plays in community. We're seeing schools around us right now. What we're hearing is that the students don't have a strong connection to their school anymore. They don't have that pride of community in their schools. And so I'm curious if, when you talk about community, if you've also seen it impacting school as a community, or do you primarily focus on the external community as well?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a great question. It's a great insight, Sarah, and something that we are really, when we're doing our work, it's about learning communities, and those could be formal school classrooms or kind of outside of the formal learning approach. But what I find super interesting about that is when you apply kind of a civic frame to media literacy, you can end up, schools are kind of politically, I'm not sure if this is going to be shocking to y'all, but they are, kind of politically sensitive landscapes. But I'm kind of firm in my belief that, that strong communities is something that we all kind of, absent any kind of political agendas, hope to have. And now I know that's a loaded term, but I think there are ways to approach media literacy that's not, overtly political pursuit, that can focus on simply seeing the school as an anchor of our community, seeing places of learning as vibrant reflections of where our communities are. And they're not perfect and they're messy, but the more media literacy interventions and experiences can help young people think about how they can connect with others, how they can support stronger communities, how they can work to create more interesting and engaging stories for others to share, and have it specifically focused on lifting up those around them. I do think, they're, implicitly, it might not be direct and short term, but I do think that those are healthy um, pursuits that aren't simply about, that it's, oh, if you teach that, then it's going to be conceived that way. And that's a political thing in a school. So I do think that community focus is something that can transcend across all of those, the divisive kind of rhetoric we hear today.
Do you have suggestions or ways that educators could kind of bring those lessons to their students to kind of help initiate that component of community and being seen? And I'm it just is making me curious, like, how as an educator in a school do you navigate the piece of media literacy that to stay away from it being controversial,
Yeah.
but create this sort of community where kind of everybody is involved and everybody is seen? And
Yeah. I mean, I think, I have all, and again, like, of course, I'm in the space of higher education. I am, my partner, she's a public school teacher. So I kind of hear anecdotally about all this. I actually think on the media literacy side, it's not really, I think the first acknowledgement is it's hard to do this work, and teachers are ever burdened to do more and more with less and less. So I do really want to acknowledge that oftentimes we say, oh, if only this could happen. And those of us that aren't embedded in school. So I do want to be sensitive and acknowledge how amazing my wife is. I'm sorry, and all teachers are
yeah.
in terms of their, in terms of everything they do. So in my sense, in the specific times where I've had the pleasure of being in public school classrooms, working with and around media literacy interventions, I often look at it as a little bit of reverse engineering. So it's nothing new, but in terms of media like, so in a foreign language class, and I just say this again from kind of hearing it in my home, there's all these wonderful storytelling initiatives that happen where they go out and they look at the monarch butterfly journeys, and they're able to kind of document those and bring them back into classroom and use language as a way to kind of make those come out to the page. I think where media literacy has, has needed to innovate more is it often starts with, like, okay, let's look at how the media portrays or represents things, and then we'll have in our classrooms a session where we deconstruct it, where we, where we talk about it, where we share our thoughts and opinions, and we look at it. And my thought is like, well, that's all well and good, but it's not really. It's simply, you're doing a couple things that I don't think are intentionally wrong, and I'm just going to reduce this to make points. Is that you're creating a scenario where the media is there and you are here, and you're constantly trying, and in a really immersive and abundant media space. I'm not sure. I think that's useful, but I'm not sure if that's the best way to get into talks about representation and critical consumption of media. Whereas, like, I often think of the strongest ones are like, okay, let's take an issue in our community or something that we want to uplift or something that we want to do. And now we're going to find out how we tell stories about this, right? And then we're going to talk about all the different ways we can. And through that experience, something that schools can do, and they could do it about their school, right? It doesn't have to be outside of their school. They could do it about a sports team or a club or a cool initiative around better food or kind of environmental, being more environmentally conscious in our school community. And through that process, you can then kind of reverse engineer decisions you make in creating media. And then once you've done it, you can come back to do the media literacy. Well, how does this differ from the things you hear about or you read about, outside of your own kind of information in your own creation process? I think starting with kind of that sense of like, who am I? Where do I stand in this? And if I'm going to tell stories, how are way those stories can create interest in this local space, and then use that to go out if you want. It can create real kind of connection and grounding into the places where we live, into our proximal environments, into those around us. If you start with, there's so much media around, we need to help people understand how to navigate Instagram and YouTube and TikTok, I think that's kind of a non-starter. It's a little bit of, it just creates some, distance and removal from the kind of ecosystem. So sorry for that, the longer answer, but to me that's like one approach that I think can always, be, I think for me, a more effective starting point for media literacy lessons. And that, to me, that kind of transcends age range too.
Yeah, for sure. And I love that because you're not only giving it meaning for the students and they're seeing value in it because it's something they are relating to. So I love that. And I think I'm one of those people that when I hear, well, before this project, when I heard media literacy, it just seemed like this like huge thing that I'm like, I don't even understand. Like, okay, I know the definition,
Yeah.
but like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
What does that mean? Or what are we trying to get kids to do? Or what,
Right.
like, and so I had all those questions because it just seemed very abstract to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then knowing what I knew from my elementary background, I'm thinking my brain just automatically went to digital citizenship,
Yeah.
which,
Exactly.
are two, I mean, they're under kind of the same umbrella, but they're different
Yep.
topics in general. So I really like
Yeah.
that idea.
To finish
Yeah.
your point is like, I think you and me alike, the more we try to define these things and the more we try to, all right, here's what it is. It doesn't make much sense to me either in like a real way. So trying to bring it to ground it in some lived experience or some kind of space is, I think, super valuable. It helps. It's a different way. It helps us kind of feel part of these, digital environments and physical environments that we grab. So that's, I think it's just a super important point to lift up a little bit is,
Yeah.
my approach is like, at first, we used to do that by just showing different representations, which is fine.
Uh-huh.
And then we would have students just make things and talk about their decisions, but it would just be in a classroom. My whole idea is like, that should be, those type of conversations should be reflecting on things that students have to do, in their environments, not simply just, in a classroom or just looking at screens. And that, I think that leap is super important, and then it leads to other conversations about what type of information do we need to have healthy communities and not have it be abstract, like, oh, we just hear all this noise, and bring it back down to the immediate proximal spaces that we live in. That's important. So
yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. And I know we've seen students really respond in our local public schools when they're looking at things related to their school specifically or their community specifically, and asking questions about why is this named this? Like, let's explore this a little bit. Why would we rename this? Let's create a little film on it. Something that is
right.
outside of the classroom. And I'm curious, have you done any work with students out in the K-12 world where you've seen the shift in engagement for them when you are approaching media literacy from this perspective?
We have done a few projects with K-12 with public school students in the greater Boston area that have, this was some I think pre-COVID, it's the last time we did it with groups of students in a few different schools, and really had them working with their teachers, moving outside of their classroom spaces into communities. And we've found, I think part of why I'm talking today is because we found really, we kind of found this idea that you can take these things that are traditionally seen as social and personal and create real interesting civic connections into them, or create moments where they see those connections, and it's not just them blaming media or talking about it abstractly. And that, kind of the project that we've done for the last 2 years with some collaborators on mapping impactful media literacy has gone back to educators again, to kind of help better understand some of the constraints they face when they're trying to do these projects, and for us to try to give them resources to do media literacy that's kind of more directed this way. So
yeah, and that report is phenomenal, by the way. And for anyone listening, we will share that report along with the podcast for teachers who may want to access it and use it in their own classrooms. It's really just a phenomenal resource for educators.
Yeah, thank you. And we are working now to kind of give more kind of use cases, and we're going to be adding those in soon, so educators can go there and they can see what approaches we take, but they can also see ways in which it's been used already. And so
Cool.
I think that's something that we're trying to offer as kind of a resource for, again, educators and community stakeholders, informal and formal spaces of learning, that can, it just helping them kind of think about ways that they can approach media literacy work a little bit more connected.
I can't wait to see that. I'm really excited because we use that report all the time in our classes.
So thank you.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see those use cases.
Oh, very cool.
So we had a question for you, Paul, from one of our University of Cincinnati students, Hannah, who is a future teacher. And she was wondering if you have seen similar trends in different countries, if you have done any work globally with these questions, and if you've seen any similarities or trends that are different in other countries.
That's a small question.
We like the university. We like to keep things very simple.
Sure. No, that's an easy one. This will be the next episode. I have had the pleasure of working globally quite frequently in my career. So just a little bit of background on that. Like, I have been running a program for a global program based out of Salzburg, Austria, that brings together young emerging storytellers from around the world. So 30 countries send students at different levels of their learning every summer, and they come and we do a really kind of immersive, global, cross-cultural, cross-border project, very immersive, around how we can, some of the points I was talking about earlier, how we can use media literacy to build community interventions. And I can tell you, it's, I think there's a lot of similarities between what types of issues exist. There's vastly different political and economic and cultural structures and systems in place, but it's amazing to see how this focus can kind of transcend divides and transcend cultures. I've been able to work in the Middle East, in Lebanon, for the last 10 or 12 years, working on a project that works with young higher ed students and even some K-12 students that are interested in being storytellers, journalists, and media makers. And you could imagine being in Beirut, students from the University of Cincinnati or Emerson College or somewhere would see this as vastly like, oh my gosh, I can't imagine. But it's amazing. They're advocating for rights and causes that they find valuable, and thinking about how to tell meaningful stories with communities. And I think I see more similarities to what we do here at Emerson College in Boston and what they're doing in Beirut than I see vastly different structures. Now, when you get into different, I've worked in different kind of countries at stages of kind of what they declare full democracies versus strong social civic societies versus less strong, and there are a lot of different constraints that happen there. But I do think some of these fundamental attributes, they exist whether you're in Beirut or whether you're in Austria working with a group from Argentina and a group from India, or whether you're in, Boston. And I could imagine Ohio too, is that, some of the acute challenges might be different, like some of their community problems, some of the infrastructure problems that they're kind of trying to use media to respond to are unique. I kind of end that by saying it's, the stronger the media literacy work is, the more it's kind of embedded and grounded in the spaces that it inhabits. Media literacy can, or
Yeah.
media interventions, the more they get removed from that. And it's why I'm just such a big supporter in starting at that very kind of the most locally embedded space you can be in, because there you can understand the realities of people more, and the way that the media impacts and engages with them and represents them or doesn't. And that's important. So that's very kind of unique to each local community, but the approaches and the media literacy kind of strategies aren't too different.
Yeah, that reminder is so helpful that you keep giving us to keep grounding our work and the work of our students in our communities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So also from Hannah from the University of Cincinnati, she was wondering what practical skills should teachers be fostering in their classroom for these students that we want to engage in this type of work? Like, what are the skills you would encourage teachers to focus on building in their students?
Right. That's a great question, Hannah. I think that's important. I think that's an important question. Now, I think, in terms of how we think about skills, that's a word that is that I think has a few different approaches. And so I would say, as teachers, we a lot of times we kind of fall back to critical thinking as kind of and I think you hear that word a lot. And I could it's and I don't want to say it's not, it should be the thing we do, but it always becomes the kind of the catch-all for what we all want to do. It's like, yes, we want to make more critical thinkers, right? I understand that. And I think that's kind of the pursuit of education in general. So it shouldn't be what we, I've thought a lot about this in terms of what we actually want to produce. And so
we do. We love that word, Paul, by the way, teachers.
I understand it, and I see it. That is, but I do think that is the call for all education, right? Is we want people to critically think about everything. And I don't think media literacy should have any type of hold on, I hear it again and again. And to me, I say, well, what does that mean? It's like, it is the way that I explain, we have these syllabi in higher education, and they have these outcomes. And to me, those outcomes are meaningless unless they're able to be applied or directed or made to kind of feel, right? And critical thinking is the same way. So I'm all in support of that. I am in support of teachers helping students become more critical consumers, more critical in their decision making. I think that's all great. When I think of what skills that I would like to see in classrooms with young people, is for them to kind of develop kind of a set of caring ethics. I think that's really important for them to be able to understand what they care about and why they care about it, and what it means to them personally. I think that's super important, and all the ways that the media kind of influences things they care about, and how it influences what they think about things. I think that's really important. I think these are things that you'll find in some of the work that I've done. I think imagination is a humongous space. It is the skill set. So rather than access, we're never going to, it's very true. We've done a lot of work in our global programs around using imagination, and working with our colleagues who have done all this work around civic imagination to help people kind of understand and kind of think creatively about alternatives to the present, right? The only way you're ever going to get anywhere else. So I think these are skills, because it is, this goes back to me, critically, deconstructing an advertisement. I think that's great. And I think that everyone should do that and continue to do that. But I think that for me, the better skill is let's imagine different systems to the current ones we have. And through imagination, you can do the deconstructing of the thing. But if you just leave people of the skill to deconstruct, you leave them hanging off with something okay, now I know that's how it works, and great. That doesn't matter, right? So for me, I think that's it. I think I think learning, I think a huge skill is learning how to work, with communities. Like, what does it mean to build trust and reciprocity, and how do you kind of go out and talk to communities and learn what issues are? Like, to me, those are the media literacy skills that matter. Um, in addition to all the learning how to create and learning some skills of technologies, but I really think we want to give people the mindsets to be able to um, better understand their place and how they engage, and then the media literacy side emerges from that. So it's a little bit of a different approach. It's a little bit harder, and it's not so direct. Like, I think the skill of how to make a podcast, 100%. But I've seen again and again that I don't need to teach those skills. If I say, here's the assignment, imagine this thing, and you can use whatever format you want, maybe it's podcasting. That young people today don't need someone to say, here's how it's done. They can really figure that stuff out. They're very agile. And they might need some support and feedback, but there's no way that they're not going to figure out how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and that's one
Yep.
of the pieces that really struck me when I first looked at the Impactful Media Literacy Practices report was those great questions that you give teachers to ask their students around imagining alternatives and imagining the future you want, and how do we get there? So if anyone who's listening, if you're looking for more resources on that Impactful Media Literacy Practices report and the guide for teachers that Paul and his team have created is phenomenal, and it has a lot of ideas for how to approach that in the classroom. It's really powerful when you start to look at it, because it changed the way I see media literacy in the classroom significantly when I looked at it.
Thank you. That's so nice, and that's our tagline. It's phenomenal.
It's phenomenal.
I think I said
I love
phenomenal
it.
several times. Yeah.
Yay.
I love
love
that
it.
word.
Well, and I love the whole imagination piece, because I think so many times, and that's one thing that's so sad sometimes when you think about school and kids starting school, is they come in with like this big imagination, and and you can see it. I mean, like, even as a teacher, you watch it kind of dwindle over time, because they meet peers that kind of squash whatever they are imagining, or there are just so many factors that play into that kind of dwindling away.
Yep.
And
Or
so
adults who squash whatever they're
yes,
imagining.
yes, yeah. And so, no, I like that perspective of it, because I think it's such a great skill.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah, I mean, and it is, the media literacy, I've thought about this a lot, because our digital spaces, they're so immersive and they're so present in us, that it really has kind of occurred to me that if we just keep using it as like we are learning more about media, like, that's important, but that can't be the whole goal of it, because it just seems like you're pushing and pushing against, it's against these systems and infrastructures that have significant problems. I mean, the other intention behind using imagination or going into a community focus or the civic focus is to start to think outside of these platforms that have done a significant amount of damage to our civic health, right? And they've kind of inserted a lot of distance between us and those around us, because they're ever invasive. And a lot of times you see these things about, like, well, we just need people to learn more about how TikTok works. And again, I'm not against or for these. I'm simply saying the point of a media literacy experience should never rest in that space, because you are creating that implicit engagement. You're creating some kind of distance of analysis. I think that's all good, but I don't know if what that's doing to advance media, a more kind of media literate society. I don't anymore understand. I think we understand these tools and spaces and platforms as things that we necessarily use for escapism, for logistics, for all this and that, but they aren't, by just kind of saying we're going to stay in this space and look at them, we aren't advancing, I think, the kind of core mission of what media literacy, practices and pedagogies are supposed to do.
thank you so much for a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you both. This was really,
Yeah.
really wonderful to do, and I appreciate the time that you've given to make this happen.
Thanks for listening to our Minds Over Media podcast. We hope you enjoyed our conversation today and learned something new. You can find the show notes and resources in the podcast description on your listening platform. For information on earning contact hours for listening, visit teachercampus.org and under all courses, search Minds Over Media. This podcast is produced by Soida and CET EdTech in partnership with the University of Cincinnati.